Last night on The Late Show, Stephen Colbert's sharp jabs at Bill Gates's projects sparked a fiery clash. Insults flew, Gates ripped off his mic, and stormed off after Colbert's brutal taunt. The viral showdown has the internet buzzing. The studio lights blazed down on the set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the audience buzzing with anticipation as the host's signature grin flashed across the screen. It was May 12, 2025, and tonight's guest was none other than Bill Gates, the billionaire philanthropist whose name carried the weight of decades in tech and global health. The crowd roared as Gates stepped onto the stage, his navy blazer crisp, his smile polite but guarded. Colbert, leaning back in his chair, welcomed him with a handshake and a quip. "Bill, great to see you. I hear you're here to save the world. Again." The audience chuckled, but Gates's smile tightened, a flicker of unease in his eyes. The interview began smoothly enough. Colbert lobbed softballs about Gates's recent ventures, letting the billionaire wax poetic about AI's potential to revolutionize education. Gates leaned forward, animated, describing a new initiative to deploy AI tutors in underserved schools. "It's about giving every kid a shot at learning," he said, his voice earnest. Colbert nodded, but his eyes glinted with mischief. "Sure, Bill," he interjected, "but let's talk about some of your less successful projects." The audience tittered, sensing the shift. Gates shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping, the armrest. Colbert's tone sharpened as he leaned in. "Take your malaria vaccine push," he said, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Billions poured into it, yet malaria's still kicking around. What's the deal? Did you think you could just throw money at mosquitoes and they'd surrender?" The crowd laughed, but it was uneasy now, the room crackling with tension. Gates' jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "It's a complex problem, Stephen. We've made progress. Cases are down 20% in some regions." Colbert didn't let up. 20%? Wow, Bill, that's like saying you only crashed your private jet 80% of the way. The audience gasped, then laughed, feeding off Colbert's edge. Gates' smile vanished, his eyes narrowing. "We're saving lives," he said, his voice low but firm. "You can't boil it down to a punchline." But Colbert was relentless, pivoting to another target. "Okay, let's talk about your climate stuff. You're out here preaching net zero while flying private jets to Davos. That's like a vegan in leather shoes, right?" The crowd roared, but Gates's face flushed, his fingers gripping the chair. "I offset my emissions," he shot back, "and I'm funding tech to decarbonize aviation." Colbert smirked. "Offset? So you pay someone to plant a tree and call it a day? That's not science, Bill. That's accounting." The exchange was heating up, each jab from Colbert landing harder. He wasn't just poking fun, he was dismantling Gates' legacy piece by piece. The audience, caught between shock and delight, hung on every word. Gates tried to steer back to his work, mentioning a new nuclear energy project aimed at clean power. "It's small, modular reactors," he said, his voice steady but strained. "They're safer, cheaper." Colbert cut him off. "Safer? Like your Windows updates that crash my laptop every week?" The crowd erupted, but Gates's expression darkened, his patience fraying. Colbert sensed blood in the water. "Look, Bill, you're a smart guy, but maybe stick to coding. Your track record on world-saving? Kinda buggy." Gates leaned forward, his voice icy. "You think it's easy? You try solving problems bigger than your monologue." The audience oohed, a few clapping at the comeback. Colbert's grin didn't falter, but his eyes flashed with challenge. "Oh, I'd love to, but I'm too busy fact-checking your TED Talks." The room exploded in laughter, but Gates wasn't laughing. His hand hovered near his mic, his breathing uneven. The tension was palpable now, the air thick with anticipation. Colbert, undeterred, leaned closer, his voice low and cutting. "Bill, let's be real. Your big ideas, malaria, climate, AI, They're bold, but they're not landing. Maybe it's time to reboot. Gates' eyes burned with fury, his hand twitching toward his lapel. The audience held its breath, sensing something big was coming. Would Gates fire back, or was he about to break? The studio lights seemed to burn, hotter, casting sharp shadows across Bill Gates's face as Stephen Colbert's words hung in the air like a challenge. The audience, frozen in their seats, felt the weight of the moment, their murmurs fading into a tense silence. Gates's hand, still hovering near his lapel, clenched into a fist, his knuckles whitening. His eyes, locked on Colbert, blazed with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Reboot?" he repeated, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think you can sit there, crack jokes, and dismiss decades of work?" The crowd stirred, a few gasps punctuating the quiet. Colbert, unfazed, tilted his head, his smirk razor-sharp. "Decades, sure. But results, Bill? That's where you're running on fumes." The audience erupted into a mix of cheers and uneasy laughter, feeding the growing storm. Gates leaned back, his posture rigid, as if physically restraining himself. "You have no idea what it takes," he said, his voice steady but laced with venom. "You mock malaria vaccines? That's millions of kids who aren't dying? You ridicule climate tech? That's a planet we're trying to save." His words carried weight, but Colbert was ready, his eyes glinting with predatory glee. "Save the planet? Bill, your foundation's got more holes than a Windows firewall. You're out here playing superhero while the rest of us deal with your beta-tested disasters." The crowd roared, but it was a jagged sound split between amusement and shock. Gates' face flushed deeper, his composure cracking. "You're crossing a line, Stephen," he warned, his voice tight. "This isn't comedy. This is real." Colbert leaned forward, his grin vanishing, replaced by a cold intensity. "Real? Like your real plan to spray chalk in the sky to block the sun? What's that called again? Geoengineering? Sounds like a sci-fi flick gone wrong." The audience laughed, but it was nervous now, sensing the confrontation spiraling. Gates's eyes narrowed. "It's research, not a plan. You twist everything to fit your narrative," Colbert pounced. "Twist? Nah, I'm just reading the receipts. Your solar geoengineering, your mosquito gene editing, sounds like you're playing God with a buggy algorithm." The crowd gasped, then cheered, swept up in the escalating clash. Gates's hand shot to his glasses, adjusting them with a jerky motion, his breathing audible. "You're cherry-picking," he shot back. "My foundation's work has saved millions of lives. You can't reduce that to a soundbite." But Colbert was relentless, his voice rising. "Millions? Or millions? In PR? Your vaccine rollouts in Africa, botched logistics, expired doses. You call that saving lives?" The accusation landed like a grenade. The audience fell silent, the weight of Colbert's words sinking in. Gates's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the crowd, then back to Colbert. "That's a lie," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "We've had challenges, but we've delivered. You're just fishing for clicks." Colbert didn't blink. "Clicks? Bill, I don't need clicks when you're handing me flops on a silver platter." The crowd erupted again, but Gates wasn't listening. His hand moved to his mic, fingers brushing the wire as if testing its weight. "You're a coward," Gates said suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. The audience gasped, the word hanging heavy. Colbert's eyebrows shot up, but his grin returned, sharper than ever. "Coward? Says the guy who buys carbon credits to sleep at night?" The crowd oohed, but Gates wasn't backing down. "You hide behind jokes," he said, his voice rising. "You tear down people trying to fix the world because it's easier than doing something yourself." The accusation stung, and for a split second Colbert's mask slipped, his eyes flashing with something like anger. But he recovered fast, leaning closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "Fix the world? Bill, Your fixes break more than they build. Your AI dreams, your climate schemes, they're castles in the sky, and you're the only one who can't see they're crumbling." Gates's hand froze on his mic, his face a mask of fury. The audience held its breath, the air electric with anticipation. Was this the moment Gates would snap? His fingers tightened on the mic. His eyes locked on Colbert, who stared back, daring him to make a move. The studio air was thick, the silence deafening as Bill Gates' fingers curled around his microphone, his eyes boring into Stephen Colbert. The audience, caught in the crossfire of their verbal warfare, seemed to lean forward as one, their collective breath held. Colbert's last barb: "Your AI dreams, your climate schemes, they're castles in the sky, and you're the only one who can't see they're crumbling," hung like a guillotine, sharp and final. Gates' face, flushed with rage, twitched, his lips parting as if to fire back, but no words came. Instead, his hand jerked upward, yanking the mic from his lapel with a sharp snap. The tiny device dangled from his fingers, its wires swinging. "Like a noose!" "You're pathetic," Gates spat, his voice low but venomous, each word slicing through the tension. The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading through the studio. Colbert's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't. "Retreat." "Pathetic?" he shot back, his voice rising to match Gates's intensity. "That's rich, coming from the guy who thinks he can code his way out of a PR nightmare." The audience roared, a mix of cheers and uneasy laughter, but Gates wasn't playing to them anymore. He stood, his chair scraping against the stage, his posture rigid with fury. "I'm done," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't get to tear me down for trying." Colbert leaned back, unfazed, his smirk returning. "Trying? Bill, your tries are like beta software, full of bugs and nobody asked for them." The crowd erupted, but Gates' eyes flashed with something beyond anger, hurt, raw and unguarded. "You know what, Stephen?" he said, his voice steady now, cutting through the noise. "You're not a comedian. You're a bully." The word landed like a thunderclap, silencing the audience. Colbert's face tightened, his mask slipping for a moment, but he recovered, leaning forward with a glint in his eye. "Bully? Nah, I'm just the guy pointing out your emperor's got no clothes." That was the breaking point. Gates' hand shot up, hurling the mic to the floor with a clatter that echoed through the studio. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice raw, reverberating off the walls. The audience froze, stunned by the outburst. Gates turned to the crowd, his chest heaving. "You laugh because he tells you to, but this isn't a game. This is my life's work." His eyes flicked back to Colbert, who sat motionless, his expression unreadable. "You want to talk failures?" Gates continued, his voice cracking. "Your whole career's built on mocking people who dare to do more than you ever will." The crowd was silent now, the air heavy with the weight of his words. Colbert's jaw clenched, his fingers tapping the desk, but he didn't interrupt. Gates took a step toward the edge of the stage, his voice dropping to a searing whisper. "You think you've won because you got a laugh? You're the failure here, Stephen." With that, he ripped off his earpiece, letting it fall, and turned to leave. Colbert, sensing the moment slipping, stood, his voice sharp. "Run away, Bill. Maybe your next project can fix your spine." The taunt was vicious, a final dagger, and Gates froze mid-step, his back to the host. For a heartbeat it seemed he might turn back, might unleash whatever was boiling inside him. But instead he shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You're not worth it," he said, barely audible, and strode off the stage, disappearing into the wings. The audience sat in stunned silence, the empty stage a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. Colbert stood alone, the spotlight, harsh on his face, his grin gone. He opened his mouth, perhaps to crack a joke, but no words came. Instead he sat, waving to the crew to cut to commercial. The cameras panned to the crowd, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief, as the show's theme blared awkwardly. Backstage, crew members whispered, phones already lighting up with notifications, as the clip began its viral ascent. On set, Colbert stared at the spot where Gates had stood, his expression unreadable, the weight of the confrontation settling like dust. The Late Show had never seen a night like this, and neither had the world.